So here's our sky scene. If we choose VPR, we can see that that's where we left off. Let's load up our bats and get these in here. So from the items menu, under load, we'll choose from scene, and we have our bat flat for flock scene that we had created. So we'll click open, and all we need is our director, our bat, and the master for it. We don't need the lights, cameras, or anything else. So we'll click OK. Now, where is it? Well, you got to remember when you're combining scenes, and we'll go here to a wireframe. Actually, even just a shaded will be fine. When you're combining scenes, one scene is one size, another scene is another size. Look at this sky scene we created. In fact, go to wireframe here. You can see our points again. We have a 100-meter grid. Now, if I press 4 on my keyboard, you can see that there's my bats down in the center. All right. So they will work just fine based on this sky that we've created. In fact, actually, I think the size works really well. Problem is, our camera's up here looking at those clouds. Our bat flock is down here. And if I come along and I see all those bats moving around, well, you know what? The distance from there to those clouds will work just fine. We just need to get our camera down. So I'm going to turn off our auto key because I want to be able to see the bats in motion when I move the camera, but I don't want to create a keyframe down here for it automatically. So that being said, let's grab the camera and move it down. Press 6 to get the camera view. And let's take this light. I don't mind it in there, but just get it out of the way. And that's also a problem because now we have auto key off, and as soon as I move, nothing stays. So when you're not using auto key, you need to be really conscious of what you're doing. So let's take the light, let's move it out of the way, and in fact, I'm actually going to rotate it on the x-axis like this, and we're going to move it into position because that's actually what we're going to use a little bit later on, and we're going to move it up. But I want it to stay in place, so I'm going to hit Create Key at 0. So it's only a keyframe at that one position, and now when we move our timeline, you can see that that light stays in place. Move the camera down, create a key at 0. So it's just manual keyframing. That's all it is, rather than doing automated keyframing. Now get to 6 on our keyboard for camera view. And now we can see our bats in view, swarming around, which is great. And let's press T and get our camera way up in there. Y command, like this. And again, just by habit, I forgot to create a key because I'm so used to using automated keyframes. So it happens to the best of us. Create a key by hitting return if you like. 0, return again. Let's get to VPR mode and see what we got. Bats with our clouds. Okay, so all of this together now is working really well with our nighttime sky and our bats moving around. But our clouds are a little out of view. So we can do two things. Either take the camera and move it in and kind of look up like that, or we can move the clouds, or a combination. So let's create a key at 0 for the camera. Under Objects, Points for Clouds, you can just move those like that. And Shift H, let's increase their size. Now, we were up close when we were looking at those and created those with the hypervoxels. So now that we've got more of the scene together and we know which parameters we're working with in terms of size, position, and camera angle, we're going to increase our hypervoxels. So from that Windows drop-down, choose hypervoxels, select the clouds, and all we need to do is just increase their particle size. And again, I move those clouds, and again, I forgot to position them. So let me do that. Let's go back into the layout, choose those clouds, particle clouds, like this, Shift H, increase the entire range, and create a key to lock them in place. And again, the reason we're doing that manually is because we want to see where they are in relation to these bats. Then we'll increase the size of those. Let's really crank them up. And the reason you're cranking it up more is because our grid is set to 100 meters. So let's just manually punch in 300. And then we can bring it back down. Sometimes a little bit easier to work that way. Somewhere in there. Yeah, we don't want quite daytime. Somewhere around 200 looks like it'll be pretty good. And this is up to your taste as well, how you want these. Yeah, maybe let's punch in 100 and see. I think that works okay. Now, I like the wispiness of them, but I think they should have a little more just a little more depth into them. So I'm going to come over to the hypertexture, and we had changed this size in the hypertexture to 5 meters. I'm going to press 1, hit the tab key, press 1, and actually I kind of like that. And that's just even on all axes, but if we stretch that z-axis, we get that kind of look. And I think that's looking pretty cool. If you come back to geometry, or excuse me, come back to shading, we have just one color in here. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is Command or Control S, and let's save this scene. So sky with bats. I had recreated a scene. We had sky, now it's sky with bats. From here, I want to put a little bit more color into the sky, into the clouds. So I can do it a couple of ways, which is either just change the color or press the T button. Gets our texture editor, same thing we've used all along, but now it's applying to the clouds, and we're going to put a gradient in. Now, we haven't worked with gradients yet, but they're really pretty simple. Essentially, you can just click and add a key, and with this key, you can change a color. Okay, so this gradient translates to the value across those clouds. You can click on the left and move those, click on the right and delete them, or you can right-click and lock them. And see how that little arrow changes? Now I can't accidentally move that one. So right-click on that, and you'll see that little arrow change from left to right. So let's put a few of these down here. Let's just go like this and this. And don't forget that you've got this top one. So let's keep the top one white. Let's take this second one, and maybe we'll make it a little more blue. Like that. See how the ends are just that nice blue? Make it a little stronger if you want. Maybe we can make the inside just a little more red. Kind of like a deep red, kind of purple color. Get a little creative with this. And then maybe that's a little too much. You can pull the alpha back or just change the color. It's a little too much, I think, because we lose some of our clouds. Let's just tint it just a little bit to that. There we go, a little bit better. And then this last one, totally up to you. We can make it dark. I still want to keep in those light blue colors, but something like that. Give you a nice yellow. So now you got a variation in there, which is great. So we're going to hit Use Texture. Close out the hypervoxels, Command S to save. And again, if you want to just play with these and increase the size of the clouds, increase the size of the texture, go right ahead, just adjust those. But now we've got our clouds, we've got our bats, looking really good. We haven't done anything with the light. So let's press 5 to get to the light view. Remember earlier, I'll go back to 4 here, I'd moved that light way over here. Well, now this is what our light sees. So I'll press 5 to get back to the light view. There's our bats, and we're looking kind of above the clouds. All right. So press 6, get back to the camera. And here's something you can do. In this drop down top right here, you can do OpenGL Overlay and OpenGL Wireframe. And what's cool about that, and I'll press Shift C to get my camera in, press the Y command to rotate, you can see the grid, the bats, in their wireframe form. And if I could find my light, you'll actually see the light in there. Let me select it. I can't actually see it, but it's buried inside the clouds. But you'll actually be able to see the wireframe of your camera, of your lights, in the VPR mode, which is kind of cool. It does slow things down quite a bit, so I'm just going to turn those off. And I did not create a keyframe, so if I just kind of move my timeline a bit, you'll see that I'm back to where I was, which is great. So what I want to do is, with that light selected as a current item down here in the bottom left, press the Properties button. What color is going to be the temperature of the light? Well, we can just do a deep blue, so it's more of a moonlight. And just to see where it is, punch this up to like 3000. Okay? That light now is just blowing things out. All right? And it gives you a good idea of just the color and where it's at. But I don't want it to be a distant light. I actually want it to be a spotlight all the way at the bottom. So it's a completely different type of light, and it changes the way the sky looks. suddenly gives it kind of a foggier appearance, which is really cool. We're going to keep the intensity up, and in fact, punch it back up to 3000 or so, and see how it's affecting things. So you can see now where it's coming from. Okay. This also gives you a good idea how cool these hypervoxels can be if you animate a light source through these particles. Okay, remember, we got these in there. They're almost like foggy clouds. And now think of that hypertexture, and you envelope those values with the gradient that we've put on. And you got this very kind of cool nebula look. So the spotlight actually can be really cool, just moving it around and doing all those cool things, getting that nebula kind of look. So for this scene, though, I think we will end up going with a distant light. I think it's going to fill those clouds just a little bit better. But that's okay, because I can still put on my volumetrics. Now what volumetrics will allow us to streak that light. So let's press 5, see what our light view sees, and let's get back down here to a vertices mode. So our light now is blowing right into the camera. And really what I want to do is kind of come over here, then we're going to right mouse down, and then we're going to Y key to rotate over, and I'll create a key at 0 to lock that in place. Get back to 6, and there's our light right there. Let's go back to VPR mode. We'll press the P key, and let's get this light now down to something a little more tolerable. And now we can see we've got a great light coming through. Now I'm still not seeing the volumetrics. Now if I go to 1, you can see that the light is actually beneath our clouds. It's right there. Okay, but don't forget, those clouds are really large. So what I want to do is get this light down far enough so that when we render, we're not blocked by the clouds. Let's again get the VPR, go back to 6. So now it has a little bit different appearance. And if we rotate it, you can see it hitting the bats now. But we're still not seeing our volumetrics. So in the light view, I'm going to rotate it down and then just get it really down kind of close. Because again, the position doesn't matter. But if we change our type of light, that will. So that's one reason I always kind of just put it in place. And I'll create a key at 0. Also, notice how large this is in the scene. All right, that has to do with our grid space. If I press O on our options and we go to GL and actually go to display, you can see our grid square size is 100 meters. You can change that to say 10 meters, and now everything's a little more balanced. That means our grid isn't as big. The light didn't change, just its representation in the 3D space. So we just made a smaller grid size to make sure we can see everything. So I'm going to create a key at 0 just to make sure that's locked in place. And that's working pretty well. Let's do F9, not F8, and just see how our render looks. And earlier, we'd done a little bit of surfacing on the wings of the bat. We haven't done much at this point because I knew we were coming towards this scene, and the environment is playing a role in how those surfaces look, just as it did with the sky. So now we can go in and change the shading on the bat wings. So looking pretty cool, but I still want a little more streaky light coming through there. So let's go back and see how it looks with a spotlight now that we have a position. All right, so there it is. Now let's choose the volumetric and go to volumetric light options. We have our light in the scene working pretty well. But I want to have a little more glare, a little more streak coming in. This is where the volumetric comes in. And again, we are having a spotlight versus a distant light with volumetric lighting turned on. And the volumetric will allow us to actually see the cone of light. Well, remember earlier that our scene was relatively about 100 meters in size. Even though I just changed my grid to 10 meters, it's only traveling one of those grids. So what if I change this to 100 meters? Now you've got this cool blown out light. It's almost like a moon. Well, it's a little too much, so let's bring the luminosity down. And we slowly bring it up. Attenuation is a fall off, and I can increase the fall off so that it's a balance between like this moon versus a light source, kind of a little combination of both, and then it's blending with the hypervoxels. If you increase the cone, increase the height, we can start building up on the size of that. So let me jump this up to like 300. Okay. Then we'll play with the fall off a little bit more. And now we get the glare coming all the way across, but we can bring the luminosity back down. And we don't have to make the color white. We can hit median color, give it a bluish tint, and that tints those edges right there. We can also enable texture. And when I click enable texture, I can put on a procedural texture like turbulence, and that will actually blend through the light, which is really cool. It's great for doing things like flames and variations on smoke. You can put the turbulence on, the same kind of technique we put on the clouds, but now you're putting on the volumetric light. Well, we're not going to do that for this. We just want to keep it simple. Now look what happens as I've increased this. You see the bat getting a streak light all the way through? And so now when they fly in front of that light source with volumetric and the moon, you're getting nice streaks all the way through. And that really shows the volumetrics. The only problem is that we lose our clouds a little bit. So it's a balance of trying to get enough of the volumetric streaks, but not that they're so strong that they cover up the sky. If we bring density down, it won't be quite as strong. And now we can see some of those clouds coming back in. If I turn that all the way off, still not seeing our clouds. The reason for that is that this light now, of course, is lighting our scene wonderfully, but it's not lighting the clouds. Okay, so what I'm going to do is worry about balancing this as if it's a moon, and we're going to save that. So we've got a great looking moonlight with some volumetrics, but now we need to see our clouds a little bit more because we've changed that lighting. We can add another light to the scene, but it's not going to quite get us the effect we want. So first thing I'm going to do is show you, this is where the cloud layer is that we've created, and here's our volumetric moonlight. And we're concentrating our bats and our moonlight all right down here. I'm going to take that light, and let's just see how it looks up above those points. And to see them, go to vertices mode. If we move this up like this, and I'm at frame 0 with auto key create on, go to 6, I can still see our light source. Let me see if I can see it here. We want to make sure that we don't lose our light. And just so we rotate here, he's way up there now. So I want to make sure that that light doesn't get lost and still shows. It's actually really important that it shows up in our scene. So we've got a couple of options. Well, if we go back to 4, our light right there is fine. You can see it up there. Go to VPR mode. We're still getting the nice moonlight. The bats can still streak through it as they fly around like this. Let's get one right in front. And you'll still get the nice streaks and everything else. But again, our clouds, some of the coolest features of this scene, aren't actually showing up. So let's do this. Shift L to get to a light. Right mouse, I'm going to move this back down a bit. Okay. If we go to our perspective view and choose these clouds, what if we just move the clouds down? Okay, and I'm not at frame 0, so I'm accidentally creating a keyframe at 41, and that's okay. But I'm going to try and move these clouds down, and maybe we can be in the clouds. Now create a key at 0, and then let's delete that key at 41. Go to VPR, and our clouds are much bigger than we need them to be because we're so close to them now. But our light isn't getting lost. So for those objects, the clouds, Shift H for size, and you can see those points scaling down. See them right there? 2 gets to the top view. Press the T key and let's move them over. 6 is our camera view. And let's position them now kind of here. And now we can size them a little bit, fill the scene. Now, I'm going to go back to VPR mode. And look what happens. Because they're now underneath the light, we're getting that, we can see them. We're getting that look that we're wanting. Okay. And then with that, I can rotate my light a little bit. Now, it's a little hard to rotate a spotlight from the camera view. So I'm going to go 5, press 5 on my keyboard, and get to a wireframe. And of course, I need to get to the light. And it's moonlight, and we're going to move it and then rotate it a little bit, kind of encompass that scene like that. And it looks like I accidentally have a keyframe at 41, and that's okay, so we'll just delete that. Shift back arrow. Press the P key for the light properties. Looks pretty good. For the soft edge angle and the cone angle. Go back to 6 and let's put VPR on. And there's one more thing I might do, just for a little more interest in the clouds. I don't mind them too much, but we can go back to hypervoxels now. And for the hypertexture, we can crumple that a bit, or we can go to shading and just play with the luminosity and the opacity. I think I'll bring luminosity down a bit. And that way you should be able to see them just a little bit more once they regenerate. And of course, VPR is taking a little bit longer because we have so much going on in the scene. For the hypertexture, you can try an automatic sizing. Give that a little bit of a shape there. Doesn't look like it's doing much, so let's manually go in and do a 0.2, and let's do this about 3. And the reason we're scaling that down is because we had manually scaled down the overall size of those clouds. So now we actually get our little waves and streaks back. And then the geometry, well, we can do an automatic sizing, see what the system tells us it likes. Often I find that that's a good start, but you might want to vary it a bit. So I'm going to, if it says 31, I'll make it 20, and I'll do maybe a 50% size variation. And we can get some nice little cloud variations in there. So it just depends on the look you're after. Sometimes I like a large variation so we see more. If we go much larger, I think that actually still works better. And then let's go back to the hypertexture, and maybe we can even streak this a little bit more. But all of it's going to add some nice interest, and it's just a matter of tweaking and playing. So I like it because the light's falling off over here and getting dark, and we still have that moonlight with that bat. The last thing I want to do, open the surface editor, and for the wings, now we can make them a little more translucent. We hadn't done that before, so we'll make them maybe about 85% translucent. Not transparent, but translucent. And what that will allow the scene editor to do is have that light pass through those wings. You can see it right there just a little bit. I'm still happy with the color. I didn't worry too much about texture on here, and I'm going to bring the specularity way down and put a very low gloss. We don't need much on there, just a little bit of shimmer. And maybe even make them 100% translucent, see what happens. If you feel that the color needs to be a little bit brighter, you can. We had put fur on the bat earlier. You can go ahead and reattach that. But overall, we can actually take the wing surface. I'll right-click on that and copy. Go to the bat body, right-click and paste. But I'll bring the translucency to 0. And that helps keep some of that same color all the way through. This is why I was saying the shading on here wasn't too important, because it was more about this entire scene and having these bats fly around. Press F9, let's see how the render looks, and then we'll get into our next project. So as this is rendering, here's a little recap. We had made a bat, we put bones in it, we've learned about flocking, we've learned about particles, we've used hypervoxels, we've used volumetrics to create a moonlight and create streaks of light as the bats fly through. We've also used hypervoxels on points so that we can see how to make clouds. You've used them on the same points for particles, so you can have things like blobs and water. So even though this is technically just one project, we've stretched out over a couple of videos. We've been able to put in all of these techniques and all of these lessons that you can use for medical animation, skies, smoke, little details in scenes, like if you're animating a car driving and you want dust and deserts and all kinds of things like that. So I'm going to let this render, and we'll come back and I'll just edit it in, because this will take a little bit because there's a lot going on. Now you can see with the render finishing, which took about 12 or 15 minutes, I believe, we got our nice volumetric streaks. You can see translucency in the bat wings. You can even see the little ears and the shape. I mean, you clearly know they're bats. They're flocking around, so works really well. And hopefully you can put a scene together and do even more with this. Hopefully have a little bit more powerful system and put more bats in and really flock them around and get the camera up in there. But that translucency works really nice because the light travels through it. Over here, it's not transparent because you can see there's no light coming, so it's actually solid. And that's the advantage of translucency over transparency. It's that when that light comes through, those thin membranes show up, whereas When there's no light behind it, they're just solid wings. So I've saved this one as, what did I call it? I called it Bats JPEG. It's on your content folder. And we're going to save this scene. This is sky with bats, like this. And remember, you're going to go File, Save All Objects to actually save any surfaces. And then that scene is ready to go. So you can load that up and tweak it and play around with it yourself. That's going to put an end to our bat experience with flocking and instancing and volumetrics and lighting and hypervoxels. Let's move into something a little more fun that lets you blow things up.